Hello, I'm John, and welcome to Edgetone Studios. Since I started my channel, I've made a number of different types of videos, gear reviews, discussions of the fact that I have Parkinson's disease, a new series on the musicians of Vancouver Island. But my number one video after my Parkinson's diagnosis announcement is the video I made on Studiolive mixers and why I switched to one. So I thought it was time for a 2-year update and to tell you about the top 8 reasons why a Studiolive mixer might be right for you in your studio. So let's get to it. Before we get started, I just want to do a plug for my sponsor. My sponsor is me. I have a band called Waveform Mountain. We have an album out called Processing. It came out in May. I'm just going to advertise it on my own YouTube channel. So if you're interested in alt pop, synth pop, art rock, music made with synths, drum machines, guitars, bass, vocals, check us out. It's amazing. Okay, so I've been on the Studiolive 32S as my primary interface for about 2.5 years now. I originally started with Apollo X8P and X16 along with a Cranbourne Audio 500 ADAT to make my 32 inputs. And I made the switch to get the hands-on control that I really wanted. And during that time, I also fixed up a Sony MCI MXP 3000 full analog console, which I brought into the studio and had in for a brief period of time before going back to a digital mixer. And it wasn't entirely because the digital mixer was better. It was mostly because that unit was just far too large for my needs. But I think in the long run, this was a better decision to stick with it. So over 2 years, I've been tracking through this. I've been doing all my audio production using the 32S. The primary features I use are the mic preamps and the line inputs, the digital routing, and overall, I've become very comfortable with moving around the board. I can easily bring up a phone's mix, alter the mix for the client. I have my own OBS mix that I use for recording or live streaming, which is how I'm recording right now. And it's just been so flexible. I don't even use a tenth of the features on a daily basis. I don't tend to use the built-in compressor, built-in EQ. I have some external preamps that I like using just because I like the hands-on control of an external preamp. And then I tend to EQ after the fact. I don't tend to need a lot of EQ while tracking, but it's all there should I need it. And I've actually considered maybe even trying for a while switching to 100% using the digital mixer and its built-in effects for my tracking just to see if I could simplify even further. I don't think I would get rid of the analog pre's. I just love these SSL 6CH, and I have 2 Newton channels from Rupert Neve. They're great. So overall, 2.5 years in, I have no plans to move off the Studiolive. I've been watching to see if there's going to be a new version. I'm not sure I'd even really want it or need it, but what I'd love to see on the new version is line inputs on all 32 channels instead of just 17 to 32. So let's get to the top reasons why you might want a Studiolive mixer for your studio. Okay, so the number one feature that anybody might be looking for an audio interface is the number of inputs that they're going to have for recording something like live drums, full bands, whatever you might want to bring in. For me, it was my immense number of keyboards, but plus the fact I was going to be doing live bands. I wanted lots of inputs, and with the Studiolive mixers, by default, you're going to get a minimum of 16 inputs with 16 mic preamps, and these are the Presonus X-Max preamps. They're a very clean preamp. They sound great. They have a lot of headroom. You just can't beat getting 16 microphone preamps in one audio interface. So think of the mixer as an audio interface with 16 inputs. Now, if you go up to the 32S, you're going to get 32 inputs, or with the 64S, you'll also get 32 inputs, but you'll have the ability to expand all the way up to 64 inputs, which is probably ridiculous for most home studios, but it's nice to know it's there. Besides the fact that there are all these inputs, I have 32 on my system, you can expand that with either stage boxes or rack mounts, or you could just have remote inputs by using stage boxes or rack mount units. So by adding a stage box to your system, you could change any one of your inputs to be coming from your stage box. And it's as simple as selecting the input and choosing network once you've been set up. So it's very quick, very hands-on. Default is analog. Choose network, you're going to get the network, and your inputs could also be USB coming back from your computer, which is what I use many of my inputs for. I have, when I'm in user mode, my PC plays back through the tape return. Studio One plays back through Auxiliary 2, and my click track plays back through Auxiliary 1, so I have independent control over the click level, Studio One level, and any audio coming from the PC. Reason number 2, huge number of outputs. So you have auxiliary outputs, 16 of them on all the models, at least 16 available buttons. I believe the 32SC only has 10 auxiliary outputs. Those auxiliary outputs could be used for all sorts of things. The default one you might want to use them for is headphone mixes. So if you want to have a bunch of headphone mixes, you could literally buy a bunch of headphone amplifiers and have up to potentially 16 different independent headphone mixes. And by simply choosing that mix, setting your levels for that mix, you quickly can set up a headphone mix. And just like with the inputs, if you optionally have a stage box or optionally have a rack mount unit connected, any of your outputs could be sent to that stage box or to that rack mixer's auxiliary outputs. So it gives you the flexibility of remote outputs if you need them. Number 3, probably my biggest one and the biggest reason I went to a Studiolive mixer, is hands-on control. So when I'm setting up a band, as I set up channels, I simply select the channel I want to work with, mic 17 in this case, set the gain, set the level for listening to it. I could apply effects to that channel through the fat channel. So I could go into the gate and put a gate on that. I could throw a compressor on there, EQ, etc., all with hands-on control. And I don't have to switch out of my recording software to another piece of software to control the setup for my tracking. It just makes things so much faster for me. Besides that, once you're setting up headphone mixes, you can quickly move to the layer that's going to have that mix. Or if you're using outboard gear such as external digital delays or reverbs, you can send to those units as well on separate mixes. All very flexible depending on how you've set up your system. Number 4, built-in talkback. Sure, a lot of audio interfaces have built-in talkback, and to me, it's a requirement because I have a separate tracking room. So when people are in the other room, if the doors are closed, you can't hear me. So I'm not sitting there with headphones on in the same room. So if you need a talkback mic, you can choose the type of talkback mic you want. I went with an Audio-Technica gooseneck. I mounted it to my desk. It goes into the talkback system, and then I have talkback on its own channel here. But I can set the preamp gain and then set the talkback level to any of my headphone mixes. By default, I keep it up nice and high. And on my main mix, I keep the talkback low and usually have it muted. Actually, you can't mute the talkback. You can just turn it off. So talkback to the main mix would not be a thing. So I don't even know why I said that. Reason number 5, incredibly flexible routing. So within the unit, you have a digital mixer. You have 16, 32, or potentially 64 channels of audio coming in, 16 or more analog outputs, depending on whether you've expanded your box with external stage boxes. And by going into your audio routing, you can set up digital patching for pretty well anything. Any of your inputs could come in, as I said, on an analog or off an AVB network through the USB returns from the computer, or even from the local SD card. Similar things for the AVB sends. You can choose which ones go to what channels, etc. And not only can you choose what type of input is coming into the box, you can choose which input is going to which channel. So mic 17 right now for me on channel 17 is mapped 1-to-1, but if I wanted mic 17 to be coming into channel 21, I could go into my input source and find channel 21 and put its input as channel 17. So you can literally remap your system any way you want at any time. So incredibly flexible routing. Maybe not everybody needs it, but it is one of the features that makes it great. Number 6, DAW control. So most people who have an audio interface use a digital audio workstation, and a lot of people want to have hands-on control of mixing processes. And with the Studiolive mixer, you don't have to buy a separate secondary digital interface to control your faders and pans. You can set up DAW mode. You go into the UCnet, you make sure you have an IP address on the network that your computer's on. You choose your software type, as in this case Studio One, but it could be Mackie for people using other products. And then you just hit the DAW button, and suddenly your interface switches to be controlling Studio One. In my case, I'm just recording my voice right now, so I've only got the one channel. I'm not going to touch it, but I could now mix Studio One directly from the controller here, and I can change preamp gain as I go. I can change panning as I go while I'm in DAW mode. So one of the cool things is while you're in DAW mode, that doesn't prevent your system from still being an audio interface. So if you've set up for tracking a band, and while you're tracking that band, you want to be in DAW mode to control faders in Studio One, you could be doing that while you're recording. So it's a fantastic sort of dual purpose feature. And just like the other layers, if you just take it out of DAW mode, you're right back to your particular session, your main mix, your headphones, whatever you're working with. So DAW control is fantastic. Okay, number 7, remote control. The Studiolive mixers, when put on a Wi-Fi network, Wi-Fi capable network, give you full remote control over the session. By launching universal control on your iOS, Android, or Windows device, you can then control your mixer. In this case, you'll see Studiolive 32S has shown up as my mixer. I haven't named it anything different. When I bring this up, if I hold this up, you get the universal control application. And by using this application, let's go to an example here. I could start changing levels of faders remotely. So I could set up my drum set, bring this tablet with me, and set levels for my recording session. And on conjunction with that, I can change any parameter of the actual mixer itself. And if you use Studio One with Studio One Remote, you also can take control of your Studio One session. And in this case, you can see my single session, my single track of my audio I'm recording for this video. And I could literally stop, punch in, punch out right here, control the mixer. So I could sit anywhere in my studio and have full control over the mix processes. So fantastic feature. Okay, and number 8, probably my least used, but very important for some people, is the idea of scenes. So with scenes, you get the ability to store all the parameters you've set up for a particular mix session, tracking session. And that's categorized into both projects and scenes. That stores, when you store a project, it stores scenes within that project. So I could create a project for Edgetone Studios, create a scene for composition, which I have, a scene for tracking drums, which I have, a scene for tracking mics, which is just generic mics. I'm not necessarily going to be drums, and go on from there. If I bring a band in, I could save a scene for that particular band. If they're coming back next week and I'm going to tear down and then set up again, and I remember where things are plugged in, I can just bring back that scene and have all the levels back again exactly where they were. The one issue I have with scenes and projects is that the user layer, which is the layer you use to redefine your layout of the board. So when I go into user layer, I have my synthesizers over to the left here. Then I have all my microphones coming from the tracking room. Then I have my desk mic, which is right here in front of me. Then I have my 11 rack, and then I have talkback and my PC and Studio One and the click track showing up. When I go out of user mode, they're just in the order of tracks 1 to 32, and then I'd have to go to auxiliary inputs to see the effects in Studio One, etc. So the issue I was going to say is in scenes, user settings are only stored by project. So if you're going to rearrange your user mode for a particular band, you're going to have to actually save a different project and save a scene within that project to be able to recall that, and then you have to recall the entire project to get it back. So a drawback on scenes, but it's still cool. So there you have it. 8 reasons you might want to get a Studiolive mixer as your primary audio interface. Some of the drawbacks that I didn't bring up. The biggest one that most people probably look at when they look at the mixer is that its top I/O rate is 48K, but I've never needed anything more than 48K. That's my standard for recording all my audio. It sounds fantastic. No one's going to know the difference. Secondly, it's USB 2 as an interface, so you can use it on older computers and more modern computers. So you don't need Thunderbolt, you don't need Firewire, you don't need anything weird. It's just USB, and USB 2 is plenty of audio data rate for the number of tracks you can get off this mixer. So don't consider that to be a negative. Thanks for listening to my reasons why Studiolive mixers are a great choice for your studio.